Welcome to the Food Professor Podcast, Season 4, our last live episode for 2023. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm the Food Professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Our special guest in this episode is Kristina Farrell, Food and Beverage Canada, a top spokesperson for domestic manufacturers of food and beverages made here in Canada. We got lots to talk about the food and beverage, particularly beverage industry today. So I couldn't think of a better guest to wrap the year. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's great. I've never actually met Kristina, but she sounds lovely. She's tackling a big industry. She's got the right resume to do it.
Yep.
It's complicated in food manufacturing for sure. So I think she'll be a great ambassador for the industry. But she's got a lot of work to do for sure over the next little while.
Yeah, it's a big remit, and she helped us understand, or certainly me, the difference between what her association does, and there's a lot of different associations, and they kind of plow their own road and add their own kind of value with their own members and talking to the government. So that was very helpful to me, understanding her perspective and her members' perspectives. Just for all the listeners, thank you, everyone. Numbers are looking great, so thank you all, everybody, for listening. Now we're going to take a little bit of a holiday break. So we'll be back live on the mic January 12th. So January 12th. But between then and now, we're going to be offering a couple of encore episodes with interviews that we think are worth a second or perhaps even your first listen. So you won't have to go without the Food Professor podcast over the holidays.
It's going to be tough. I mean, I always enjoy our weekly chats. And so I'll be drinking my eggnog while thinking of you, Mikael.
Very good. Very good.
Yes. Yes.
I will miss you as well. All right. Well, let's get into we got a bunch of research and a bunch of news. We're going to pack it in on this final episode. Let's start with the Cattle Dalhousie Labs survey. What are Canadians' New Year's food resolutions? I have it here. Talked about grocery habits changing. I mean, one thing that jumped out for me, which not great news, I suppose, for our friends in the restaurant business, is people intend to dine out less.
Yikes.
With the latest... I guess you could call it setback, but our friends at Restaurant Canada didn't get what they were after from the government with the extension of the CERB. So that's a bit of a crisis in the making coming up for their members. And they didn't get a bit of, was there any good news here for anyone else? I guess if you're a grocer, that was pretty good news because you're going to eat more at home.
I think the ready-to-eat counter is going to be pretty busy in 2044. People will avoid tips and overpriced alcohol and all that stuff, and they'll dining in and in their pajamas, listening to hockey. I think that's going to be Canada for a while, I guess. And the other, I don't know if you picked it up when you look at the results, but health seems like a big issue too.
I saw that. I mean, I always I give a bit of side eye at that because everybody says, what are you going to do next year? I'm going to get more, including myself, by the way. I'm going to be more healthy. I'm going to eat more healthy. I'm going to exercise more. Everybody says that. Basically,
you say that? Saying.
Well, basically now I'm just saying I'm going to just wait for Ozempic.
Do you remember what my New Year's resolution was last year?
No, I do not. What was it?
Yoga.
And? Did you yoga?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Yeah.
And that was it for yoga. Yeah.
That was it. Yeah. I should have actually done more yoga, but, anyways.
Anyway, there's two schools of thought around resolutions. I just generally don't make them, but I do try to do better, every year. And I do try to do new stuff. Now, the Canadians
it's good that you're telling me because I haven't noticed.
There you go. You can hold me accountable. The number one primary New Year's resolution, number one, eat healthier and make better food choices. We got to support that. That's a great result, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That was 14. That was 15%. I'm just rounding up here. Cook more meals at home and reduce dining out. Now, what do you think? Do you think Canadians are saying, because there was a good vibe for a while. I mean, who was it? I think it was President's Choice. Loblaws had a great commercial, be with people. And you've, over the course of the podcast, you've supported that. Like even when it was Canada's Food Guide, we got into that. Listen, we want people to break bread, so to speak, together and eat together. Is there any recognition of the benefits of that, or is this all kind of a response to they're feeling like it's too much to eat out? As you said, maybe it's tipflation. They don't. What do you think's behind this? Any sense?
2022 was a tough year for a lot of people, and we saw it in the data. People just decided to spend less on food. You can't really not see how people may have made different health choices, really, in 2023. So I think that reflecting about 2023 and looking at 2024, my guess is that they just want to make things a little bit different, and they want to take care of themselves. And post-COVID, the post-COVID era is very much about health. It's about mental health as well, and food is a big part of that. So I think that's probably where we're at right now. Inflation still being a problem, but less of a problem than 2023.
Well, I guess I was reflecting on our conversation from last episode around how the study landed. I mean, what I continue to see in the media is, it's still going up. It's going to cost Canadian families, a family of $700 more to eat. Inflation's not going down. It's just not going up at the same pace. I mean, it's kind of like glass half, whatever. So I think Canadians are reflecting that and said, well, I'm going to eat healthier. I'm going to be more thoughtful, and I'm going to eat more at home. And, that in and itself is a great thing. But, like Anthony Bourdain used to say, go to a local restaurant, have a couple of drinks, and have a Negroni, and have another one, and, meet some local people. So I do worry that it leads to isolation, because there's enough isolation. There's enough things to keep us isolated, and going out and seeing people, I think, is so anyway, I do worry about this a little bit. I don't know, in the things of worlds week.
Yeah, the other thing, if you notice, alcohol is a big theme this year. I mean, a lot of people are thinking about drinking less for two reasons. One, for their health, and two, for money. 3%
of people said more non-alcoholic beverages. 3% is not a big percentage. Do you think that's just a Gen Z thing, or do you think that's just an overstated thing? The dry January, or what do you think? I mean, it doesn't, from this survey, it doesn't look like it's a big deal. 3%.
Yeah, but this year what we did differently is that we forced people to only pick one.
Ah, okay.
And so only pick one. Last year was you pick whatever you want. So this year was about a New Year's resolution, and that's why there's 25%.
I got it.
We didn't pick any,
right?
Because they're not willing to. They're not thinking about food when it comes to New Year's resolution. Or they just can't pick. But I think 3% is actually not bad. But at anything over 10% is quite significant.
Right. Interesting. All right. Well, we'll put a link to the survey. A great way for you and your friends.
Thank you to Cattle once again for the support. And it was great.
Great. It's a great, these great snapshots are really fantastic. 5,000 people too. It's a very robust survey.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about, and I'm sure it's in the hopper somewhere. What are looking back at 2023, what were your top 10 issues? What are the things that occupied and you thought were the most important things that happened in our very busy and it's a busy year, lots of stuff to choose from. Lots of stuff we talked about in the pod, but what rises to the top for you? I'm sure you got an op-ed article coming out somewhere, way, shape, or form about how you. Yeah, no,
it's kind of it's you know me. I mean, it's probably the last op-ed of the year. I always reflect on the year that just passed, and of course, I try to think of the top news stories, and frankly, my source of inspiration is the podcast because so I go back. With listening to all of the episodes we recorded this year, because it does kind of reflect all of the major things that have actually happened this year. On that list, I'm going to have to think about the Green Belt in Ontario. I think, I mean, that was a major story. I mean, Ford lost some major political capital there, lost a couple of cabinet ministers too, for farmland. I mean, who would have thought that farmland would be like a headliner in the biggest province in Canada? I mean, and it was a scandal we heard about across the country. I think the other story, cultivated meat being approved in the U.S., that's another big one. I think it's going to have an impact on Canada. Gene editing is going to be on that list.
Just on the cultivated meat thing, we did a great, what was his name? Josh Tetrick, right? One of the, from Just who got approved. We interviewed him. Coming out of that, I was very enthusiastic. But the more I've been thinking about it, and maybe this is just the spin that everybody, again, there's a whole host of people who are against for a whole bunch of commercial and non-commercial reasons. But, there's been a lot of stuff coming out that you just can't scale that business, that, the tanks and the equipment it takes to scale the business is beyond the scope. It's never going to add up to anything.
Yeah.
And I guess and then there's, I read an article that and again, I don't know for nothing, but that there's too much lead, or that the process itself isn't pristine. And, it's...
I'm expecting, some research to suggest that this may not be the silver bullet that we expect. I
guess we just got to watch out who sponsors that research, I guess.
Exactly. And it's never obvious, by the way. Never obvious.
Right.
So I'm expecting some of that to happen. Mm-hmm. And because when we talk, I've spoken to a few CEOs in that space, and scalability was never mentioned as an issue, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But it'll be interesting from a policy perspective. It'll be interesting to see how things evolve in Canada, specifically as a result of this new approval coming out of the US. Gene editing was another big, really, I think, pleasant surprise for at least me. I think it was a great move. It was a good decision from Health Canada and the CFIA. So anti-GMO groups may disagree, but I think when you think about climate change and all the challenges that farmers face, I think gene editing is a huge tool for them.
We heard some of that last week with Peter Patel, right? Talking about
Peter Patel talked about it, and
pest. I never connected the dots. I love talking to these people because I never connected the dots in the way he connected them for me around what do you call it, pest resilience and the pest problem. Is it's climate change. It all goes back to climate change. Yeah. These pests start to move north, right, and start to live in areas.
Couldn't live
absolutely,
before.
yeah.
Look at what's going on with cocoa production in Ghana and the Ivory Coast. It's pests affecting crops, and when you're in a impoverished area, or when you are in a country where R&D is not as developed as here, you're stuck with that problem for a while. Same for coffee, for example. I mean, some of these crops are really highly vulnerable due to climate change. But in Canada, we have the luxury of having some great research going, and gene editing to me is really a great portal to make agriculture more competitive and more efficient, really. So that to me would be on my list. What would be on your list?
Well, I was thinking as well about the cultured meat, the lab grown meat. I thought that was a pretty big move forward, particularly getting its approval from the non-objection letter and all that stuff. I thought that was pretty important. Obviously, on my mind, and we've talked about it, is the food alert system in this country, or the food alert process, or how to make food safe.
Right, the food recalls.
You and I were talking off mic, and I was saying, what if when we get these big bold alerts on our phones when children are abducted or there's a tornado coming, maybe we should be getting that for when we shouldn't eat cantaloupe. I mean. So anyway,
actually, the recall system was actually on my list. It didn't make the top 10 because we get food recalls every year, and we face the same freaking problem every year. I mean, every year is the same problem. We kill people, and we don't communicate risk properly. So for you to add it to your list makes total sense. But we're facing the same problem. Nothing changes. So it's quite frustrating.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about was, and again, we've talked about it very recently, is, the slavery in the supply chain, bad things happening in the supply chain, underage children. I mean, there was that scandal in the U.S., underage children working in plants. So that was, top of my mind, is this, if we're going to put focus on food, and I worry that, when people look for the cheapest food, that somebody's cutting a corner somewhere, somehow, and so I think it just calls on everyone who in the food service business to be more diligent. I mean, I think organized crime makes it hard for them to be diligent. They hide these things, but there's been some obvious things. So, and I guess the third thing would be, listen, how many times there are grocers are going to be called in front of the government? I mean, there's a lot of policy stuff that happened this year. The code of conduct, of course, which is...
I call it the blame game.
Well,
the useless blame game. And frankly, so in the industry, there's some blaming going on between grocers and suppliers, which really is useless. And outside of industry, you have politicians pointing fingers at grocers, which is useless again. So there's a lot of that going on. This useless blaming game, to me, is one of this year's top story, along with the issue of milk dumping. It actually happened this year in February, if you recall. The video in Ontario that went viral.
Right.
And so to me, that would make a top 10, because we never actually seen that before, ever.
Yeah, you talk about it, but you don't see it much. And I read the minister is out, your buddy, the minister, is out talking to foreign retailers, trying to coax them into coming to Canada,
yes.
Which seems like a fool's errand to me, like as if the thought hadn't occurred to them. And B, it's like, wait a minute, how many times am I going to have to sit in front of you? I don't like the way you're treating grocers. Why should I come submit myself to that? Anyway, I don't know what's going on there. I don't know what the objective is, but
And if you actually look at that
politics, in the politics and grocery seems to be a big thing,
And frankly, I think we're starting to see more people being just tired of it. I'm certainly tired of it, for sure. But the one thing that really I noticed looking at the CPI report from StatsCan's this week, so I always, as you know, I always dig into the numbers. And what I noticed was from October to November, all food categories are now more expensive than in October, except for fish and seafood, which means really what Ottawa's doing, the political pressure put on grocers, is not really doing anything for that period. Over time, I don't think it's going to make a difference. Markets are powerful. Grocers know what they need to do. They will want our business as much as possible, and they need to make sure that their prices are competitive. That's the bottom line. There's no evidence right now that was given or provided by StatsCan which suggests that Ottawa's pressure made a difference.
A lot of performative stuff. Well, we'll see.
I will be drinking champagne over the holidays in honor of our food, our food industry, for sure, and to our minister as well.
Minister, absolutely. And if you're listening, or your people are listening, as we've said multiple times, you're welcome to come on the podcast. We're very friendly hosts. We'd love to get your perspective and talk to the people. So there you go.
That's right.
Invitation to the minister. Exactly. and
I've interacted with him. He's really a delightful person. I mean, who happens to be a politician and a cabinet minister. I mean, he has responsibilities. He has a job to do. So I totally get it.
And he's got a big job. Like when you look at his remit, it's massive. Like he's on one day he's handling grocery, the next time he's handling telecommunications. So it's a big remit. So we would understand if there's not time, but make
and frankly,
15 minutes for us, Minister, come on.
He made the transition quite well. Like that jump from telecom to grocery, because he really never interacted with the sector, and for him to do that, it's a unique. Let's face it, the food industry is a unique sector. And people are set in their own ways. So to see a person like Minister Champagne coming in with his own style, very aggressive style, I thought he did a pretty good job adapting to the sector in general.
So you got a list of these things, and you're going to publish an op-ed. But have we hit the high notes? Yep. Is there any others you wanted to say? Because there'll be a list. We'll put a link in the show notes.
In terms of things, I mean, not really. I mean, I'm going to probably surprise a few people with a couple, but it is going to be a top 10. And what's really interesting is that I actually write a top 10 for Quebec and a top 10 for The Rock. And they're never the same items, because media is different in Quebec, and they cover stories very differently. Okay. And so some things actually do matter in Quebec, like the Greenbelt issue. It's a non-story in Quebec.
I guess the pork issue is a pretty big issue in Quebec.
Exactly.
Right? The pork industry would be a big issue in Quebec.
And Agropur actually went through. Agropur went through 2 strikes this year. Not one. 2.
Labor. Big year for labor disruptions. Big year for labor
labor's
disruptions.
on my list for sure. Yeah, absolutely. high-profile strikes. And what was really unique this year, I think, is that so many deals between the leadership of unions and management were not ratified by members. They were rejected so many times.
You don't see that often. And you don't see that often.
I think workers just wanted to be heard. They wanted to voice their concerns. And so I thought that the leadership and membership were kind of divided on several issues because of what was going on with the marketplace, I think. Yeah, because the number of strikes was not record-breaking this year. It's the length of them. The average length was much longer than the average. Yeah,
and we still got one. We still got a big one happening in one in Quebec,
Vancouver.
But you've got the it's not a sweet time, so to speak, out west, right? Starting to run out of sugar.
Well, since you're going to be in Vancouver, you should drop him. You should drop him a visit.
Let's take a break from the news. Let's get hear from Kristina Farrell from Food and Beverage Canada.
All right, joining us today on our show is Kristina Farrell, the new Food and Beverage Canada CEO. Welcome, Kristina, to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, first of all, congratulations on your appointment. Tell us a little bit more about your background and how you became CEO of a very important group in Canada.
Well, I've been in the role for about 6 months now, but before joining Food and Beverage Canada, I had been working for a number of years to support the government relations and advocacy efforts of several organizations in the agri-food space. So I've actually worked with organizations like the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, Chicken Farmers of Canada, Canadian Pork Council, and of course, Food and Beverage Canada, to name a few. Although I have worked across sectors, I actually really began to develop a specialization and a network of both government and industry contacts in this area. I didn't think I was going to end up working in agri-food, but here I am.
Do you have any background in agri-food when you were growing up?
No, my background was international development and public and international affairs. So it was really through my work that I developed that specialization.
That's great. Now, Food and Beverage Canada, there are tons of groups out there representing manufacturing. Could you tell us what's different with Food and Beverage Canada? Because we've had Michael Graydon on our show, and he represents food, health, consumer products. That's in manufacturing as well. There's CTAC in Quebec. So what's unique about FBC?
So it's certainly a busy space, but we're the only national industry association representing Canada's domestic food and beverage manufacturers. We don't do health, we don't do consumer products, it's only food and beverage. And I'll note all of our members have manufacturing facilities actually located in the country. So we don't do the big multinationals who don't actually have presence in Canada, meaning we do actually speak for Canadian interests. And you did just mention Sylvie, you mentioned CTAC. We're unique in that our membership actually includes the 6 provincial and regional food and beverage associations. So those for Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba, BC, Alberta, and Atlantic Canada.
So for Food and Beverage Ontario, for example?
Yes, they're all members and they're all on our board.
That's great. Yeah, no, I've actually worked. In fact, just last week, we were talking about plastics at Food and Beverage Ontario, and I think it was 2 weeks ago. That was a great event. They tend to organize some really interesting events in Toronto. So, and I know that you attend many of them.
So let me unpack that, or you unpack that for me just one more click. So if I'm a global company, but I have a manufacturing plant, and I have a manufacturing plant in Canada, I can be a member. So that's right. Okay. So I got it. The domestic part. I just want to make that clear. Now let's talk about, you're in some ways, I won't say a roll-up organization, but what's the mandate? What's the remit? What is it that you're focused on? You've been in in that chair 6 months, which is like a blink of an eye. So kind of a roll-up question, so to speak, is what are the big files and what things were you brought on to move forward?
Well, policy and advocacy is really what we do at Food and Beverage Canada. Our mission is to advance a competitive business environment for our members, so those companies that are also members of those provincial associations. And we do so through knowledge sharing, consultation, business-led solutions, and proactive advocacy. And I'll note that I find the way that we've been able to bring the provincial associations sort of together to feed into what we're doing and what we're bringing to the federal government in terms of recommendations and solutions. I think that we've gotten a lot of credibility doing so. It's it's worth noting we're actually one of the co-chairs for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's Food Sector Network, which I think it's because we do have that credibility.
Mm. A couple of weeks ago, we had the president of Restaurants Canada on, and I said to her, and she agreed that a lot of the job when it comes to advocacy or talking to the governments was explaining unintended consequences. So what are the unintended consequences in your industry? I would imagine, because we've talked to Sylvie from CTAC, and we spent a lot of time talking about the shortage of people to the access to people, but also on this podcast we talk a lot about don't chase people. Maybe you should be investing in technology. Tell me how those two things interplay.
Labor is still one of our biggest issues. Even when I was meeting with the provincial associations just last week, we were talking about how for some of the larger companies, it's no longer as much of a pressing issue today, although I'm sure that'll change in the coming years. But for the small, medium companies, it's a huge issue, or it remains one. When it comes to innovation and technology, our food and beverage manufacturing industry is well behind where we should be and where other industries like ours are. But it's difficult if you're a small, medium company. Right now, you're dealing with inflationary costs. What do you spend your funds on? Do you spend your funds on improving other efficiencies throughout your line, or do you go out and buy large pieces of equipment that will make you more efficient, will perhaps reduce the amount of labor that you need to depend on, but that's very costly.
So you'd be looking for the government perhaps to come with some capital tax kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
That's a very sophisticated term, by the way, my stuff that you would ask them for. But I mean, if you want a strong domestic manufacturing sector, part of that is the tax structure, yeah?
And I'll note right now there are either tax benefits or credits. There's also funding available for some of those really large companies that are buying the most innovative, the most expensive pieces of equipment, but there isn't really much for our small and medium manufacturers who perhaps they just want to buy a piece of used equipment. It's not the top of the line. It's not the most up-to-date equipment, but it's still going to be helping their processes to be much more efficient, and that funding isn't available to them.
And that's something that you might knock on the door of politicians and say, listen, if you want to achieve, and I guess this kind of dovetails into the next question around sustainability, environmental concerns. I mean, your members would make a lot of products that would be in a lot of packages or bottles. Of course, we're all thinking about what's going on in COP28. So it's kind of not that it's not top of mind all the time, but I'm sure sustainability. What are the big files on sustainability for you? And there's a lot of moving parts in recyclability and blue box programs. But for you specifically, how are you thinking about it, and what are your files?
Well, of course, our companies are conscious of the necessity to develop strategies to minimize plastic waste. A lot of them are part of things like the Canada Plastic Pact, or they're working towards their own sustainability goals. But we do have quite a few concerns with some of the one-size-fit-all approaches to reducing plastics that we're beginning to see. One of our big files right now is the Pollution Prevention Planning Notice for primary food packaging, which was launched in August. We actually created an ad hoc working group to respond to that because some of our concerns are related fairly to an increase in food waste, impact on food quality and shelf life, lack of adequate alternatives, which we're seeing a lot of, and disparities in both regulations and recycling capabilities across provinces and municipalities. So we really are trying to work with the federal government as well as the provinces to sort of come together on what those solutions can be. But I don't think we necessarily agree that a one-size-fits-all approach is going to work in this case.
Now, what about innovation and technology? I think everyone knows that right now labor is an issue. Innovation is something that the industry always has to keep an eye on. How are you promoting innovation? How are you promoting the adoption of new technologies within the industry as a group?
Well, it's worth noting Food and Beverage Canada actually serves as co-chair of the Canadian Agricultural Human Resource Council's National Workforce Strategic Framework for Agriculture and Food and Beverage Manufacturing. Say that 5 times fast.
That's you're trained. You're well trained.
Smooth. You're smooth.
Oh my God.
So we're actually co-chair of that alongside the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. And what that project is looking at is how do we solve, as an industry, the labor crisis across the food supply chain. So we're looking from primary ag, and we're also looking at it from processing. And one of the working groups that we're actually developing a plan for is automation and technology. So we're looking at things like, what are the skills that we need to be able to use some of this new and innovative equipment? How do we continue to upskill so that people can continue to use this type of equipment? What's actually needed especially for a small company versus a medium or a large company. So that is one of the things that we're working on quite heavily.
Now, you've been CEO for 6 months, but it seems as though you've been CEO for a few years, because I see you like everywhere. You're very active on social media, which is really nice to see. The food industry is not known to have lots of leaders who are really out there. So congrats on that. I think it's important for you to do that. You've met a lot of people, I'm sure, already in the industry, outside your sector as well, to try to understand, what's needed. How do you move the sector forward? Have you ever given some thought on goals for FBC, for the sector itself? And so how do you see the sector grow over the next, say, 5 to 10 years or so as CEO of FBC?
Well, it's been a really challenging few years, not just the pandemic, but we've had ingredient shortages, increased input costs, whether climate events, blockades, labor shortages, what have you. And our industry has so much potential, but I think we really need the support of our federal government to ensure that we reach it. Obviously, we have Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and they're fantastic partners, but I do feel, and I'm sure this sentiment is felt within our sector, that there's a lot of focus on agriculture, and we need the other piece of the puzzle, right? We need agri-food, and especially food manufacturing, to also be front and center in some of those conversations when we're talking about how we can ensure our food chain domestically, but also when we're looking at exporting and supporting that as well.
Well, it's a great discussion. I was, at the beginning of it, I was trying to figure out and part and parcel where you fit in the overall ecosystem. So that idea of the focus on the domestic manufacturer. I mean, we've talked to many domestic manufacturers. So it's great that they have a representative. So if they wanted to learn, if the listeners wanted to learn a bit more about, maybe get in touch with you, LinkedIn, as Sylvain says, you're a LinkedIn person, but where do you go to get in touch, and where do you go to learn more about FBC, ABC, and give me all that 411?
So definitely you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, also on Twitter or on our website. It's worth noting Food and Beverage Canada is a very lean organization. It's myself and a part-time office manager.
That's all right.
I think that
members
really speaks to
it's efficient. That's efficient, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Do you spend a lot of time in Quebec? I know that CTAC is actually quite visible, active in Quebec, but do you actually join a CTAC once in a while for some events?
Yeah. I was actually in Montreal last week with CTAC. I was at their event, and I also spoke to their board of directors, which I do with a lot of my associations. Yes,
I was actually supposed to be at that event, but unfortunately, I had to go to Alberta on Thursday, so I missed it. I'm sure the market event was. It's always a wonderful event, and they give out awards to different companies. It's a great group.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Now you were going to say something about the lean state of your organization and how it represents your members well. I think we cut you off a little bit. What were you going to say?
Yeah, so we have the provincial associations, and I depend on them for a lot of insight. I would say that Food and Beverage Canada actually has a fantastic board of directors as well. But it's worth noting, even though we're a very small team, we've been really successful in, I'd say, supporting the sector and bringing different players around to support different conversations. We did this really successfully back in 2021. We actually had a coalition of 11 industry associations to develop a proposal for an emergency foreign worker program, which actually led the government to announce the Workforce Solutions Roadmap. So that's something that we did with our very lean team with the support of our very active board members.
Yeah, very good. And websites and social, where can we find you?
On my LinkedIn, I couldn't even tell you what I'm under. My name on LinkedIn is Kristina Prue, but it's also Farrell. That can lead to a bit of confusion. And then Food and Beverage Canada, we have our own Twitter page. You'll see that I'm retweeted a lot. It's worth noting that I also run all our social media accounts as well. So if you reach out anywhere there, you'll get me.
Talking to you directly. Well, we'll put a link into your. We'll put a link, so to speak, to your LinkedIn in the show notes, and we'll put a link to the website. Well, hey, listen, thanks on behalf of Sylvain and I. Thanks for joining us on the Food Professor podcast. Great to get a bit of insight into what your files are, where your concerns are, and we wish you continued success. And thanks for supporting the domestic manufacturers. We love them. We run into them a lot at CIAO. We have them elsewhere on the pod, so we're a big supporter as well. Do what we can, and thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Take care, Kristina.
Well, it's a great segue talking about food and beverages. Let's keep talking about food and beverages. Finally, we talked about it. The announcement came down from Ontario around the opening up of what technically is called the Master Services Agreement that gave a monopoly, so to speak, almost monopoly to the beer store. So the long expected opening. Now this doesn't take place until 2026. But they got to give notice and all that stuff now. So what are the highlights? Let's see. Individuals, you can buy beer, wine, cider, cooler, seltzers, and other low alcohol ready to drink at retailers, including convenience stores. That's important. Including convenience stores at gas stations. Retailers will have to, they can only be sold between 7 and 11. No matter where they're open, spirits, gin, whiskey, all still just exclusively at the LCBO, so not hard liquor.
Yep.
And they being retailers, convenience stores, can sell beer in 12s, 24s, and 30s. Now, so lots of stuff going on. There's a few nuggets in there for the wine industry as well. Some kind of a repeal of a tax at the farm gate. So generally good. I guess we would say a modernization. I guess it looks like the beer guys get another 5 years to be in it somehow as a distributor. And of course, we've got to think about recycling. I'm just kind of doing a summary here. Here's the thing that occurred to me as I was thinking through all the implications. So the convenience store industry has been really after the government in this province to extend beer sales to the convenience stores. I wonder how their insurance rates are going to look once they start selling beer. Do you have any experience or knowledge of that?
Oh my goodness.
We're not the first province. Like, there's not a lot of margin in my mind with these products. So is it all upside, or, how is it in provinces in Canada that, Quebec?
I think for consumers, it's going to be a plus for sure. I think choice, the beer store model was, the beer store model was a joke. I think it should have been gone a long time ago. How you get to a better place, it's probably going to take a while, culturally, and socially, of course. I think there's a lot. Ontario is a really weird place when it comes to alcohol. I'll say it out loud. Yeah, it's bizarre. It's just, there seems to be this awkward relationship, and let's let it go. We're in 2024 here. Things have changed. Let's make sure that people are well served and move on. As far as risk goes and insurance, I honestly have no idea, but it wouldn't be setting a precedent. It's not like it's never happened before. Other provinces have figured it out. So I'm sure that brokers, insurance companies will figure it out as well.
Anyway,
are you concerned?
Well, I'm not informed enough to be, so to speak, concerned as someone who lives in Ontario. Being able to buy in all these different places, I think is good.
Right.
I think everything that they've done makes sense. I was in the new Eataly restaurant yesterday, and they had a whole. It was beautiful. It's their second in the country, and they had a big section of Italian wines. And I just stared at it like it was something you've never seen in my lifetime in Ontario. My God, there's wine on the shelf in a grocery store, So I do appreciate that. So I think making all the right moves, the watch outs are, what happens with recycling. But again, we're not the first ones to do this, so we'll figure it out. A lot of purchasing power in one place. Anyway, it's not, I don't know, I'm trying to end, like what story do we talk about that ends the year on an upbeat note? Let's see. Give me something upbeat to end the year on. What could we end on that's a positive? So we've got lots of guests that have helped us understand what's happening. I think the farmers are getting have a better voice, not necessarily just from us, but
honestly,
in general.
I just want to take a couple of minutes to pay tribute to you, my friend. You've been great all year round. You were able to make our podcast sound professional. We've reached top levels this year with Apple rankings. I think we went up to number 4, I think, at some point. All the things that we're doing with this podcast wouldn't be possible without your work and dedication. So I want to thank you very much for all of the things that you do. So it's great.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. What's our COVID project our little COVID project that became the little freight train, really. So thank you.
That's right.
There ain't let me just say, there ain't no Food Professor podcast without the food professor. So there you go. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate you. And
One day you'll become, maybe we'll call the podcast the Food Professors.
I think I'm a PhD short of that, but that's okay. I like the sidekick gig. Yes, that's my Ed McMahon for those. There, it takes everybody back.
Yes.
All right. All right. Well, listen, great episode to wrap up the year. We got a big year coming up next year. We'll be at Seattle again, and we'll be meeting lots of interesting people. Lots of interesting people. We're going to get back on the pod or onto the pod. And as I said to everybody, we'll take a break until the 12th with our live episodes, but we're going to have a couple of great encore episodes, interviews that maybe you've missed or that are worth, we think, hearing a second time. But everyone, be safe. All the listeners, thanks again. And to you, my friend, and your family, be safe and enjoy the holidays and get a good rest. And we'll get all charged up, so to speak, for next year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Looking forward to a bright and great 2024 with you, my friend.
All right. From your lips to God's ears. See you, everybody. Right. Have a great holiday.
Take care. Bye. Happy holidays.